Early morning in San Francisco's Mission District. An old man rolls up his bedroll in the storefront doorway that's his only home.
Well, I've been living on the street for 6 years, sleeping in doorways. I check the garbage cans all along the way.
Dragging along a bag of birdseed, he heads off on his morning ritual, a baby pigeon clutched to his chest.
Bird, 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 bird.
Every day he ministers to his flock. The pigeons await his arrival and swarm around him in a flurry of feathers.
These are advanced human beings. These are ancient wizards that decided to reincarnate in something without hands so man couldn't put them to work. and by flying about, they don't need cars, gas, oil, meter maids, or Arabs or Israelis.
He calls himself Lone Star Swan, and even in this eclectic neighborhood, he stands out as a colorful character, unique, eccentric. He is, in fact, mentally ill.
I am schizophrenic. I am 1,000-person characters. I have claimed to be God, Jesus, Buddha, and Napoleon, and backed it up and proved it.
He sometimes calls himself Messiah.
Jesus eats his heart out at every word I say. My scriptures are so much better than anything in the Bible.
His mind is filled with voices he can't control.
I have to listen to them off and on. If I ever shut up, I have to listen to them. Sometimes you hum or something to shut them up.
Them?
The voices.
Voices that say hateful things.
And it's just constant harassing and heckling. Like say, oh, let's see, we're going to kill your pigeon the minute your back is turned. Just stuff all day long.
Swan has grand delusions. He's run for mayor, governor, president.
Take a chance. Take a chance on Lone Star Swan America. I will back it up with books.
He's deeply paranoid, believing the government has mind rays to control his thoughts.
And they can spy on your mind, and they can force send on your mind, and they also found a way to map the nerves, and they can wiggle your eyes, they can clench your fists and give you Charlie horses and headaches. And what I'm telling you is probably top secret, and they may stop you at the airport because I told you this.
Swan was not always a schizophrenic living on the street. His real name is John Ratliff. He was once one of my best friends.
I don't know what to say. It's just hard to believe that's the same guy I worked with 30 years ago.
In the early 1970s, John was a television news reporter. He was exceptionally talented, one of the most creative people I've ever known. We worked together at a small station in Springfield, Illinois. John went on to produce documentaries. This one, called Sam, about the Special Olympics, won a first-place prize at the San Francisco International Film Festival. In those days, John was a family man with a wife and 4 children.
In so many ways, he was such a great father, and so caring, and so much fun, and so charismatic.
With the birth of Casey, he changed. Something just changed.
In a small house in Minneapolis, Mary Ratliff raised John's children by herself.
I didn't want to leave him, but I obviously couldn't live like that, or the kids.
Mary escaped with the kids in 1974 when John began having psychotic episodes and threatened the family.
I mean, he held us hostage on a farm for 2 weeks. Kids would eat corn from the cornfields during that time. I was down to 85 pounds. Chris, I had hives all over her.
I'll always love him. I may always be a little bit angry, and I will always be a little hurt that he wasn't there when I was growing up. That he missed so much, as well as that I missed so much.
I longed for a dad most of my life.
It was chaotic, and I guess, you know, I think like most kids that parents split up, you kind of hope they get back together.
And I was always so mad at him because I thought he could change, that he could change. And I just couldn't figure out why he was doing this, why he was breaking up the family.
As Mary learned more about schizophrenia, she eventually understood John could not control the destructive thoughts that seized his mind. Out of necessity, Mary has become well educated about mental illness. Her oldest son, David, also suffers from schizophrenia.
One time we had David, finally got him into the emergency room, and he's just screaming that they're taking my brain away, they're taking it, and you can't get through to it, you can't break that.
There is a strong genetic component to schizophrenia. If one of your parents has the illness, you have a 10% chance of having it too.
So anytime your own behavior gets a little erratic, or you're under a lot of stress, or any other normal type of, you start wondering, well, you know, am I going crazy for real?
It's not only a life-changing disease, it's a many lives-changing disease.
Schizophrenia has fractured this family and traumatized every one of the Ratliffs, especially Mary.
Oh, the kids can tell you I've cried my share of tears. Helplessly, because you're just helpless.
At first they'll be scared of you because they know what human beings are like, you know.
While the Ratliff kids grew up without their father, they kept his memory, and all of them have tried in some way to renew a relationship with him.
Everyone in my family has felt the need to go out and rescue him in some way, or make a difference, or get him off the streets.
Casey went to San Francisco last summer to find his father.
And I walked right up to him. I said, Lone Star Swan. He goes, yes, who is this? I go, John Ratliff? And he said, yeah. Who are you? I said, I'm your son, Casey Ratliff. And he carded me. He wanted my license. He wanted to know if I was telling him the truth. He goes, well,
Casey laughs to cover the hurt he feels from his father's rejection.
And he never let me hug him. He let me shake his hand. I know what illness is, and, you know, logically, and I'm educated and whatever, but it didn't matter. It still stabbed you in the heart.
It's one of the dilemmas of this disease. John's paranoia prevents him from accepting help from the people who love him the most.
And I frankly think I probably have no kids, but I helped raise partway 4 kids.
Under our laws, John has a right to choose this life, even if it's not entirely a rational choice. So here he remains on the streets of San Francisco, feeding his birds and spreading his offbeat ideas. Almost every day, he pecks out a one-page newsletter on an old typewriter. He calls it his rag, and he writes about mind rays and pigeons, his dreams and delusions. He passes out copies in the neighborhood. Most people ignore them, but there are some loyal readers who find a certain insight through John's insanity.
And at the same time, there was kind of a poetic truth to everything he was saying that I found to be really interesting. Sure, it sounded crazy, but on the other hand, it was actually right. It was sane, you know, in a certain sense.
Even when I knew him 30 years ago, John had a unique perspective on life. He still does. And despite his illness, if you listen carefully, you can still hear echoes of a poet's voice.
Standing, sticking your head into a tree, looking at the berries, half struck with the light through the leaves, and say, wow, that looks just like a bunch of moons.
John's way with words has won him a certain status on the street. He's found acceptance here and some degree of respect.
He's almost become a holy man or a wise man to the neighborhood. And you'll find that certain people look up to him. I mean, some people can laugh at him, but most of the people here have learned to love him.
A lot of people know me for my rag.
Living on the street is a hard life, but John's found a sense of purpose here.
And so I'm doing what I feel I must do, I will do. I do it without pay, and I would do it if I was crippled crawling on a sidewalk. I'd do it, and when I die, I'm coming back and punch him in the mouth and do it again. So I guess I'm happy. I'm doing what I damn well I'm going to do.
For someone with schizophrenia, just walking down a crowded street can be a perilous journey. The sights and sounds of everyday life can overwhelm the senses.
And so there is a flood of things from the outside. So schizophrenics are very distracted by sounds in the environment, by people talking in the background, which they begin to suspect might be whispers about themselves. And so the whole thing gets jumbled together, and to try to make some sense out of it, schizophrenics end up either feeling that they're being persecuted, that someone's trying to influence their brain, or that there are actual voices in their brain that have taken over their brain.
Dr. Robert Friedman heads a staff of 40 researchers at the CU Health Sciences Center who are trying to unravel the mysteries of schizophrenia.
This is the ultimate human illness because it's an illness in the way that people think about themselves. There you go. Is that all right? Did it hurt? Yeah.
And it's an immensely complicated illness. Researchers at CU are looking at brain waves to trace how the wiring gets crossed inside the head of a patient with schizophrenia.
Miswiring is not a bad analogy. We know that neurons have not reached all of their proper positions. You did well, Bernadette.
They use MRI brain scans to probe the neural pathways of patients to better understand how the disease causes the mind to malfunction. And the researchers are dissecting DNA to unlock the genetic code that can trigger schizophrenia.
Anywhere from 6 to 10 genes are now being actively researched as possible causal elements in schizophrenia. And it's a couple of different subtle differences. It's probably more than one gene.
And genetics is just part of the picture.
And also remember, only 50% of the risk is genetic. So there are other factors that enter in to make a case of schizophrenia.
Factors like prenatal care, viral infections perhaps, and minor brain injuries.
We're hopeful in the long run that things like better prenatal care, which protects the head before birth, better attention to head protection after birth, which includes fighting infections and bicycle helmets and skiing helmets, and all those good things will protect people's brains so that the risk of these brain illnesses like schizophrenia and other brain illnesses as well will decrease.
One surprising but promising area of research is nicotine. When we were with John Ratliff in San Francisco, he smoked constantly. In fact, 80% of schizophrenics are smokers.
It's a form of self-medication. It's not very effective. The effect is extremely brief.
But smoking does help calm schizophrenics, so the researchers are looking at how that happens in the brain and how to duplicate the calming effects without the health risks of smoking.
The drugs that are being developed here at the University of Colorado are all targeted to look like nicotine and its positive effects and to remove all of the negative effects.
Finding better medications is the #1 goal of researchers.
That's correct. We want better treatments and fewer side effects so that we have drugs that people feel comfortable taking for long periods of time.
I'm kind of leery of medications.
Like John Ratliff, many people with schizophrenia refuse to take medication because of the debilitating side effects.
Lifelong, it's very hard, day after day after day, to want to take a medication that makes you feel stiff, that can make you tremble, that can increase your appetite dramatically, that makes you sleepy.
There is some urgency to this research. Thousands of schizophrenics die every year. Their suicide rate is 100 times higher than the general population's.
It's a very desperate illness. People are tormented with the voices. The paranoia fill their heads, really crush their spirit.
And there can be other victims, as in the case of Andrea Yates. The voices inside her head told her to drown her 5 children.
If you look at crime in general, schizophrenics are not overrepresented. But people who have schizophrenia who are not adequately treated are prone to violence. And many very spectacular and very tragic crimes are committed by people with schizophrenia who are not being well treated.
So they may try to kill you to protect you from being killed by the CIA.
John Ratliff's ex-wife Mary learned early on that her mentally ill husband could suddenly turn violent.
And he came in and he just stormed that room and beat me almost to death.
I've also carried some fear, from him. When he had his breakdown, was somewhat violent.
Despite the fear, Chrissa Ratliff says she still loves her father and misses him.
I would do anything for one hug.
It's difficult for Chrissa and her brothers to talk about their father, but they're willing to bear the pain so people will have a better understanding of this illness.
I mean, it's the first step. You know, with awareness, maybe we can have compassion and understanding and empathy. And maybe from that, something will develop.
It's a disease. It's not a choice.
Back at the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center, researchers are hoping for more funding. They say schizophrenia deserves more attention since it's such a devastating and common illness. It afflicts about 1% of the population, more than 2 million Americans.
On the one hand, things look pretty good in Colorado in terms of what we're capable of doing. On the other hand, the underfunding is still dramatic, and so we could do more given the tools we have today, as well as continuing to develop new tools for the future.
While Friedman says they've made enormous progress in understanding schizophrenia, much work remains to be done.
A cure is not on the horizon.
But I fell to the crack in the universe and went flying over in dream time.
So for John Ratliff, the outlook is not promising. He's likely to live out his life here until he finally fades away into the cracks of the sidewalks that have become his home.
I'm almost gone, right? I'm 61 years old. How can I possibly live past 70 or something? I'm almost out of here. I'm a short timer, right?